Good evening, Professor and classmates. I chose to do my project on the love letters of Abelard and Heloise. Although my project might portray this story in a slightly different way than that of those who have written about this epic love story in the past. I do not believe it was love at all. I believe these letters would more accurately be called the after effects of lust and how it damages the heart and souls of those who engage in it. Sure, we live in a society that doesn't look at fornication the same way that they did in the past. But I would gather that these rules were put into place to help us be less hurt and more fulfilled when we engage in behavior we can be proud of. Absolutely in no way are my comments meant to chastise anyone or to tell anyone how to live their lives. My only point is that the love letters between Abelard and Heloise show less of love and more of pain. I would theorize that had it been love, the outcome would have been vastly different. During the 12th century, France was governed by the Catholic Church. According to the history guide written by Stephen Christ, religion was the governing force. When a conflict arose between common law and holy law won out. Most people respected the holy law and abided by it, or went to great lengths to hide their shortcomings. Before we begin, let's gain some context into how the 12th century people of France may have felt about terms like love and lust. The Bible was looked at very literally in that day, so I will be referencing some passages on the matter. First, let's define love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul likens charity unto pure love. He then goes on to say in verses 4 through 6, charity suffereth long, and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. As a contrast, lust could be defined as the opposite of all of these principles. However, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 28, we read, But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. I show you these scriptures to show you that they took these things very seriously in this day. You couldn't even think about a woman without being condemned for having committed adultery just at the mere thought of a woman in that way. So let us look at love versus lust in the stories of Abelard and Heloise. I wrote out these principles that we just talked about. Show you that. Love versus lust. And I wrote down the principles, suffereth long, and then the opposite of that on the other side. So let's go through each one of these principles one by one and determine whether or not in the story of Abelard and Heloise, if they were showing lovingness or lust. So the first one is suffereth long. I don't think anyone would argue the point that both Abelard and Heloise suffered long. They sinned. They turned themselves in, sort of, and they paid penance for what they had done. And they suffered long. I mean, she was a young woman, he was a man in his prime, and they turned themselves in. She gave her vows, and he went to a hermitage, and they did suffer long. So I don't think anyone would argue with that. So I'm going to put a check on the side of love for suffereth long. The next one is envieth not. In his own admission, in a letter to Heloise, Abelard tells Heloise that the reason why he encouraged her to take her vows is because if he couldn't have her, and remember, he was attempting to seek a holy life, so taking a wife wasn't something he was really going to do, that the only other man that he was okay with having her was God. So I think that shows envy. I think that shows this, if I can't have you, then no one really can. So I would put a mark on the left side for envies. Throughout all of the texts, through the letters written by Abelard himself, through Heloise's letters, through letters from his contemporaries, we learn that he is boastful and he is puffed up and he thinks he is the best of the best, and they think he is just over the top, more or less. So I'm going to put check marks on that side, on the left side, for all of those behaviors, because I think that he is very narcissistic. The next one is doth not behave itself unseemingly. I think we have to put the check mark on the left side because they did behave unseemingly for the rules of that day. They knew what they were doing was wrong. They did it anyway. The next one is seeketh not her own. I don't think there's enough evidence to make an argument either way on that, so we will just kind of skip over it. And also is not easily provoked. Although Heloise came off as very annoyed in some of her letters, I don't think she was easily provoked. I think I would have been pretty annoyed myself at not receiving a letter for more than 9 years, and then having found a letter that he wrote to someone else about me. So I don't think that was easily provoked. I think that was 9 years of pent-up tension. The next one is thinketh no evil. Because they act in an evil way for that day, we have to assume that they thought evil and then acted on it. So we're going to put the mark on left side for that. The next one is rejoiceth not in iniquity. We all know they did wrong. However, I don't think they were sitting there going, we did wrong, hallelujah. I think that they were pretty sorry for what they did. I think that they felt bad about what they did. I think, although they didn't want to stop doing what they did, I think that they did feel bad. I don't think that they were rejoicing in any of their iniquities. And the last couple we'll just kind of cover all together. There beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, and endureth all things. I think that Heloise bore her cross pretty well. I don't know that I would have taken so lightly to a man that I loved telling me to go and take my vows after having had his baby and going through all these things with him. I think she bore it well. I think that her murmurings were warranted. It wasn't a life that she wanted for herself. And then the hopeth and the endureth. In one of her letters to Abelard, she told him that if you die within hours, I will be dead too. I won't be able to live without you. And he died, and she ended up living for decades after that. And she did some really great work for her church, for her community, for the sisters in her, where she was living. And so I think she did hope, and I think that she did endure. I think the only reason she did endure in that situation is because of the hope of someday righteously being able to be with Abelard. Abelard, on the other hand, I'm not sure that he did love her in the same way that she loved him. I think that she was young and naive and went along with some of the crazier things that he wanted her to do out of that love. So when we look at the chart I made, on the side of love and on the side of lust, it's pretty even. So how do we make this call? How do we say it was more love or it was more lust? I think we have to go to the end of the story to figure that out. I think the fact that they didn't end up together, and yes, some would argue that they ended up together in the afterlife or in heaven or however you choose to look at it, and that they were buried together. But they didn't end up together temporally at all. And they both gave up very successful lives. She was very, very smart, and she did use that in her after she took her vows. But the story, the love, wasn't a success, and we can't prove one way or the other that on the other side of the veil that it was a success. So I think we have to mark it as this is a story of what happens when you do wrong, or when you I don't want to make anyone feel like I'm saying that they're doing wrong if this is how they choose to live. But I think that in this day and age, we have to look at it as them paying penance for the wrong that they felt they did. So that's all I have for you. I hope you enjoyed that and learned something. And I'm sorry that I went a little bit over. But my theory is that it was more lust than it was love. So goodbye.